In this video, I'll demonstrate how to create a VPC peering connection. So here you can see I'm in the AWS console. I'm still in the Stockholm region. And if I go to VPC, you can see in my AWS account that I still only have one single VPC. So I've got one VPC, it's in the Stockholm region. I'm going to create a second VPC just for the purposes of establishing a VPC peering connection. So my VPC peering connection is going to be relatively simple because it's just going to be within a single AWS account and it's going to be within a single region. So there's not a lot of complexity to it. I'm not creating overlapping CIDR ranges. So again, I'm going to keep it relatively straightforward from that perspective. And so now I've created a new VPC. I just called it second VPC. Within that second VPC, I'm going to create a couple basic elements here. I'm going to create a new subnet. I'm going to call my subnet second VPC public subnet. I'm going to associate it with my second VPC here. I'll pick an availability zone. Again, I'm going to pick the same availability zone as my other subnets are created in, even though it doesn't really matter. And I'll choose 10.2.1.0/24 as the CIDR block for this particular subnet. And I'll click on create. Okay, so now I've got two different VPCs and I've created subnets within each of those VPCs. So I'm going to go back to my primary VPC, I want to call Rick Demo. So now on the left side, I've got my menu here and I've got a menu for peering connections. And so now I'm going to establish a new VPC peering connection. I'm just going to call it Demo Peering. And I'll choose a VPC that should be the requester. So I'll choose my primary VPC, Rick Demo. Now again, you can establish a VPC peering connection with a VPC in another account. So if I want to establish a VPC peering connection with some other account, I'll choose that option here and I'll have to put in that AWS account ID and they'll get the VPC peering request. But I'm just going to choose my account. Again, I can choose a different region and establish a VPC peering connection to another region, but I'm not going to do that in this case. I'm going to create a peering relationship with my second VPC. And this is the kind of situation that you might run into in real life if you're creating a peering relationship between development and test, or between test and production, or something like that. So I'll go ahead and choose Create Peering Connection. And now you can see that a VPC peering connection has been requested. I can see the requester VPC owner and the acceptor VPC owner as well. And so I'll just go ahead and hit OK here. And now we've got a VPC peering connection that is pending acceptance. So I'll just click on Actions, and because it's part of the same account, I'll accept this request. And I'll just go ahead and hit Yes, Accept. So now my VPC peering connection has been established. But remember, nothing really happens until I configure a route to send traffic across that peered connection. So I've got my VPC peering connection established. I've got two VPCs, 10.2.0.0, that's my second VPC I just created. Then I've got my first VPC, Rick Demo. And I've got a VPC peering connection established between them. So let's go to my subnets and create the necessary routing entries. So I'm going to choose my public subnet in my primary VPC. This is the public subnet in my primary VPC. And I'm going to go to the route table. And the route table here is my public route table. So I'm just going to click on that link here and modify that public route table and create a new route for the VPC peering connection. So I'll click on routes. I'll click on edit routes. I'm going to add a new route for 10.2.0.0/16. And if traffic is destined for that network, I'm going to send it over a VPC peering connection that I have established. So there's my VPC peering connection. And remember, the route table works in this manner. It routes traffic to the most specific route. So if we look at my routing table, I've got 3 routes. One of these routes is a default route. That's by far the least specific route. So there's no need to change the order of these route table entries or anything like that. If traffic is destined for the 10.1 network, it's going to go over the local connection inside the VPC. If it's destined for the 10.2, it's going to go over the VPC parent connection. If it's destined for anything else, it'll go to the internet gateway. So that's my route table for my public subnet in my primary VPC, RIC demo. Now I'm going to create a new route table for my second VPC. So I'll call it second VPC public, and I'll choose my second VPC, and I'll hit create. And there we go. My route table was created. So now I've got a new route table. Let's clear this filter here and find my new route table. Second VPC public. So here's my second VPC public. At the moment, it only has a local route. I'm going to edit routes, and I'm going to add a route to my first VPC, RIC demo, 10.0.0.0/16. I'm going to say for traffic bound for that network, send it over the peering connection. I'm going to save that route. And then I'm going to associate this route table with my new subnet that I've just created. So I'll edit the subnet associations, and I'm going to associate this route table with my second VPC subnet. So I'll hit save there. And there we go. So let's go look at our subnets real quick. I've got my public subnet. The public subnet is in the RIC demo VPC, and its route table looks like this. A route to the local, a route to the second VPC over the peering connection, and a default route. And then if we choose my second VPC public subnet, it doesn't have an internet gateway, it doesn't have a default route, we don't really need it. Here's my route to the first VPC over the VPC peering connection and the local route. So now I've got the basic configurations required in order to establish VPC peering. So now I'd like to test it out. But before we do that, I just need to make a few other minor changes to my second VPC to help make it a little bit easier to test. So number one, I'm going to give it an internet gateway. So I'll just create a new internet gateway. I'm just going to call it second VPC. My internet gateway is created, and I'm going through this very quickly because you guys have already seen this. I'm going to attach it to my second VPC. So now my second VPC has internet access. The other thing I'm going to do for that second VPC is quickly update the route table for the public subnet. And I'm going to give it a default route to the internet gateway. So now I've actually made that subnet public. That second VPC has a subnet that I called public. Now that second VPC subnet actually has internet access. So let's go to the AWS console home screen, and I'm going to create a new EC2 instance in that new subnet. So I'm going to launch a new instance. I'm going to choose Server 2012 base for this particular instance. I'm going to choose configure instance details. I'm going to put it in my second VPC and in my second VPC public subnet. And I haven't configured public IPs on this subnet, so I'm actually going to override that. This particular instance, I want it to get a public IP. So I'm going to give it a public IP. And then I'm going to simply just click next, add storage. I'm going to go with the defaults for all of these things. I'm going to create a new security group. I'm going to allow RDP into this instance from anywhere. And I'm also going to create another rule. I'm going to allow all traffic across any port from 10.1.0.0/16. So those are the rules in my security group, my new security group. And I'm going to call this VPC2-demo. That's going to be a new security group that I create. And I'll hit review and launch. I'll use my existing key pair. And now I've created a new EC2 instance inside of my new subnet. So let's go back to the home screen of the AWS console. We're going to browse into EC2 and take a look at the running instances that I currently have. So I've got a public and a private instance that I created in my first VPC. I also created an instance that was a Bastion host in my first VPC. So I created a Bastion host for VPC 1. And now I just created a new instance. I'm actually going to call this one Bastion host for VPC 2. So now there's a Bastion host that I've created in each of my VPCs. And this one is still initializing, but I can see the public IP and the private IP of that EC2 instance. So what I'm going to do now is connect to Bastion host VPC 1. And I'm going to try to ping the IP address of Bastion host VPC 2. I'm going to verify that I can actually pass traffic over that VPC peering connection. So here's my RDP session for Bastion host in VPC 1. I'm going to launch a command line. And now I'm going to try to ping the private IP of this new instance that I just created. This instance that's sitting in VPC 2. So let me copy that private IP. And I'm simply going to type ping and paste in that private IP. And let's see if it worked. So it looks like I can successfully send traffic across that VPC peering connection. So my test was successful. Let's just quickly review what we did here. I created two VPCs. Within those VPCs, I had subnets. I created a VPC peering connection. I updated the routing table for my subnets. And then I was able to successfully validate that these two instances could successfully communicate across that VPC peering connection. So that's how you establish a VPC peering connection using the AWS console.